amazing thing. This church began in 1887 as some early pioneers had a heart to come to Denver, Colorado and reach a lost people. So I want to share with you this morning some times in my life where I've gotten lost. You see, I grew up in Casper, Wyoming. And one of the things about Casper is it's at the very tip of the Rocky Mountains. And so the Rocky Mountains are always roughly south wherever you're going. And so one thing I didn't realize until I moved away from the mountains was that my entire sense of direction is given to me by where the mountains are located. See, in Casper, if someone said, go this way and then turn north, all I had to do was go, where are the mountains? They're there, so roughly north would be that way. And then I moved to the Plains States. I got to Oklahoma and someone said, turn north, and I went, I have no idea what that looks like right now. I couldn't find it, and so I found myself lost occasionally. But the time where I was most lost in my life was actually in the mid-1990s. I was a part of an exchange program, Casper, Wyoming, and Shizu, Taiwan, where we would go over for about a month, give or take 3 weeks in Taiwan, and about a week in Hong Kong. When I was in Taiwan, things were okay because, you see, I had a host family while I was there that I was staying with, and God worked it out to where my host mother was an English teacher. That was very convenient. But when we got to Hong Kong, things changed dramatically. We were all in a hotel, and there were about 30 students and about 3 people who were adults guiding the trip. If you're a parent, you can already begin to feel a little clenching as I tell this story. But you see, we had some rules in place because of the dynamic between how many adults and how many teenagers there were let loose in Asia. And so we had the rule that you had to stay in groups of 3. Imagine your child or a teenager that you might know and 2 of their friends being allowed to wander Hong Kong on their own. And we had to stay within 2 train stations away from our hotel. Well, the way the story goes is there was a girl. There's always a girl, right? And I kind of had a thing for her, but I had grown up kind of an overweight kid, and I never would have imagined that this girl would ever have any interest in me. And it seems she might have, because she had given some advances, some hints. Guys, you know how ladies give us hints, and we're so good at picking them up. And she had hinted, and we were out, it was myself and this girl and her friend, and we were alone wandering through Hong Kong, and she had been hinting, she stole my hat, was wearing it and stuff, but I didn't pick up on these things, and she became very frustrated at the fact that I was not picking up on these hints. And so, as a young teenage girl, she decided the best possible option for her would be to ditch me. So her and her friend left. So here I am in the middle of Hong Kong. If you can see the city here, millions upon millions of people. Probably the most, U.S. correlation to it would be New York City. And I was a teenage boy at the time, and this was the mid-90s, the grunge phase, emo was a big thing, and I decided that the best thing I could possibly do in light of this new situation was that I was going to break the other rule, because I was already no longer a group of 3, so I might as well hop on the train and just see how many train stations down I could go. And so somewhere around the 9th train station later, I got out and I began to wander the streets of Hong Kong by myself. As a teenager, without the wonderful benefits of having a cell phone or Twitter or GPS. And I saw no problem with this. I was having a good time. I was still a little upset. It was a good way to blow off some steam. And as you can imagine, the story goes that I did make it home okay. But it was years later, as I had my own child, that I began to reflect on this moment in my life, because I didn't really think I was lost. I was just wandering a little bit. But I started to realize, had I just taken one wrong turn, had I just met one wrong person, that moment of my life could have been a very different story. And as I held my child, I began to think, what would my mother have done? Had she gotten a long-distance phone call on those phones that used to be attached to the wall and had the cords on them, and it was someone who she'd only met once or twice, a few classes preparing me to go over to Asia, and they said, Mrs. Brown, we seem to have misplaced your son. You don't know my mother yet, but there would have been holy terror rained down. And I don't know exactly what she would have done, but I can only imagine as a father myself now that she would have stopped at nothing to see her lost son come home. She would have given up all comfort. She would have given up all personal sense of personal security to find what was lost. You see, I find myself in a very different world than the one that I grew up in, even in the mid-1990s. There's a shift in our culture that's taken place, some ways subtly and in some ways that we just can't ignore it. From that time when I was lost in Hong Kong to now, the world back then, only about 0.5% of the world's population had access to the internet. Think about how different that is to today. Back then, if you wanted to get on the internet, you had to plug into this modem, this thing that would attach to a phone line, and if someone else called you, it would disconnect you. And when you did go to get online, there was this little box that sat next to your computer, and it would yell obscene things at you. I don't know why they made it so loud, but it just would yell at you. There was no GPS when I was lost because the founders of Google were still in college at that point. There was no Twitter, no Facebook, no YouTube, no cell phones that are with us in every moment of every day. It was a very, very different world. And what I've found over the course of the last several years in living and entering into people's lives is that we face a very lost world. But just like me in that instance in Hong Kong, most of the time the person would say, I'm not lost, I'm just wandering. I'm not lost, I'm just not sure where I'm going just yet. But when I was in Casper, the thing that guided me, the thing that revealed to me where everything else was and the way that I should go in life were those mountains. And I believe, as a follower of Jesus Christ, that the thing that in our lives is what guides us, what stands like that monolithic structure, like those mountains in our lives, is that relationship with Jesus Christ. And without Him at the very center of our lives, we're more lost than we realize. We're more lost than we can come to bear. And one of the realities that I face as a pastor who has served in ministry for about 15 years, that over those 15 years, the world has changed in dramatic ways, not just in the terms of the internet, but in our culture and in our society. We now face a generation that are defined as millennials, if you want to call them that, roughly born between 1980 and 2000. Depending on how you define it, I would fall just on the very tip of that category. But the truth of this generation is that it is now the largest generation the world has ever seen. Even bigger than the boomers, numerically. Counts for about 21% of the U.S. population, and yet only about 10% would call themselves churchgoers or those who would follow Jesus Christ. In fact, about 1/3 are actively antagonistic towards church and organized religion, and yet there's a hunger inside of them towards also one of the most spiritual generations we've ever seen. But this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone in this room, I'm sure, because the reality is, Pew Research survey from last year revealed that Denver sits as the 4th least religious city in America. So we're not talking about someone out there that we've never met. We're talking about our own lost children, grandchildren, our friends, our co-workers, our relatives, people who have something else at the center of their lives, something other than that relationship with Jesus Christ. And one of the questions that I have had to ask myself over these last 15 or so years in ministry is, what am I willing to do to see the lost people come home? What personal comforts am I willing to give up? What am I willing to sacrifice myself if I truly believe that God truly loves real people and that they are truly lost without Him at the center of their lives? And so, one thing I've had to come to in my own life is the realization that while the world around us changes more rapidly every single day, I'm still not comfortable with Twitter. I still just don't quite get there. the solution for the problem of the lostness of our world has never and will never change. And remember, as Pastor Ed preached in his final sermon, we face a world that sometimes scares us. We see the giants in the land. And maybe perhaps that makes us feel at times like grasshoppers, right? Maybe we see this culture around us. We see the statistics that are just numbers that someone who's much better at math than I sat down and came up with. But those numbers represent real lives, represent real people that we interact with daily, whether it's someone in our family or someone that we see even in the grocery store. Jesus is still the answer. Jesus is still that thing that if they would orient their lives around him, center their lives on him, everything else begins to come into focus. And that lostness goes away. But how do we bring an unchanging hope, an unchanging gospel to a world that changes every time we turn the corner? Every time some new invention, every time some new company revolutionizes our world, we change more rapidly than ever. How do we live with an unchanging hope? Well, I believe that there are some solutions, some answers, and I believe that we can find them in God's Word. And so I would encourage you to take out your Bible or one of the Pew Bibles, or if you're like me and you're using an electronic device, you can go to the YouVersion Bible app and turn or click to Ephesians chapter 4. And we're going to spend a few minutes this morning looking at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. It begins with these words. Now these are the gifts that Christ gave to the church, or to the people of God. The apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and to build up the church, which is the body of Christ. And this will continue until we all come to such a unity in our faith and such knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. And then we will no longer be like immature children. We won't be tossed or blown about by every new wind of teaching. We will not be influenced by people who try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of this body, the church. And he makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Now, this is one of the passages that guides my life, my ministry, and I want to spend a few moments examining some of the things that are here, but the reality is, just like anywhere in God's Word, we could spend weeks, we could spend months on just these few sentences and never get to the depths of what God is telling us here. And so I just want to give a glancing look at this idea. How do we change the world? How do we change this city? Just as those early pioneers came to Denver in 1887 and said, we want to create a people here who would go and make a difference. Well, first of all, I just want to tell you one statement. It guides my life. And I hope that if you remember nothing else from this morning, that this one statement would stick with you. Because what I see in this text and what I see throughout all of Scripture is that our calling in life is to help every person live a Jesus-centered life. Our calling in life is to help every person, wherever they are in their walk, far away from God, or have been following Him for years. We are called to help them put Jesus at the center, just like those mountains that helped give me my sense of direction that I lost about 15 years ago. But as we look at this piece of Scripture, a piece of God's Word, we see some amazing truths. Just like Jesus' final words in Matthew chapter 28, where He said, go into all the world and make disciples. This verse tells us that we are to help and we are to be growing in every way, in every aspect of our lives, more and more like Christ. It's something that shapes who we are, something that shapes our decisions, the way we go about life, the way Renee and I parent our children, the way we interact with people at the grocery store. It isn't something that just happens because we just so happen to step foot in a building that had the word church in it. It happens when we are the church. And for whatever reason, God in his infinite wisdom decided that the hope of the world, those that would take this unchanging message into an ever-changing world, would be us. That we are his plan A. And as far as I've read in the Bible, unless I'm wrong, he didn't leave a plan B. He didn't leave another option just in case we didn't work out. It says that we are called, and that our chief calling is to help others live a Jesus-centered life. So that as we see our lost friends, parents, children, that we are those who would relationally engage them and show them what it means when Jesus takes over our lives, when he is that thing that orients us and helps us. There's something else I see in this that I think is shocking at times because it doesn't leave room for spectators. It says in Ephesians 4:12 that the job description each of us has as Christ's body is that we are to help others. We are to live our lives in such a way that inspires them, and we are to take that message to them. What surprises me about this is it's not just the job description of the pastor. We'll get to that here in a second. But it's the job description, the calling, the joy of every one of us who calls Jesus Lord and Savior, that we are that plan A. We are those messengers. We are the ones who are called to shine Christ's love and his truth in a world that rejects truth, even though we're concerned about alternative facts right now, and doesn't know what it means to be loved, even though we talk about it as a culture more than we can imagine. And so when Jesus gave us those final words, that job description, when he told us to go into the world baptizing, discipling, teaching, he said that's all of our job descriptions. Now, it does give a job description for pastors, and I want to share with you what I believe my job description to be from here, because it clearly says that pastors are called to equip God's people so that they would do the work of ministry. So this doesn't just mean then that those who have a seminary degree, they're the ones who can finally go out and be the gospel, be Jesus for those around them. It doesn't just mean that once you've checked certain boxes or completed certain classes that then you're finally qualified. And thank goodness it doesn't say, for those who are perfect, go into the world and make disciples, because I would be disqualified very quickly. He says that as we are growing to be more like Christ in every way, we are to be a witness, a model. We are called to make an impact. And just like those pioneers who helped to plant this church 130 years ago, our calling is to reach lost people wherever they are and help them live a Jesus-centered life. That's it. It's a highly relational thing. In fact, if you look at how Jesus made disciples, it was all about these interconnected relationships. He would spend time in what would basically be the church service of the day. But it says then he would sneak away with his disciples and he would just invest time in them. He didn't wait for people to come to the church because he was all about his Father's business of equipping the church so that the church could go and be the church wherever they were, regardless of a building, regardless of a job description, regardless of whether they were a tax accountant or a judge, whether they served French fries at McDonald's or they were ones who served in the sides of the roads. That it was all of our job description and our calling. So, yes, I do have a few degrees that have helped to train me for ministry. I've served in a few different churches who have helped to equip me to do this thing that we call ministry. But my primary job description is not to be the one who does all of the work of what it means to be the church. My calling and my passion is to help equip each of us, wherever we are in our walk with Christ, whether it's just beginning or whether we've been close to Him for years, in such a way that we are inspired, encouraged, empowered to make disciples wherever we are, of our family members, of our friends, of those in our small groups. And in that, I'm called to preach and teach God's Word, but I'm also called in an even deeper sense to help equip each of us to be a witness to God's Word wherever we are, whether it's on a stage like this or whether it's sitting over coffee next to a coworker. I'm called to baptize, but I'm even more successful at my job description when I am helping people in this church lead others to a place where they are able to confess their love for Jesus Christ and allow that person then, in their relationship, to baptize others. I'm called to visit the sick and to be there in moments of need, but I'm also more attuned to what God has called me to do. When I help to equip an army within the congregation of those who relationally care for one another in such a way so that when someone else comes here or when they see us out there, they go, I don't know what it is about those people. They just seem to love each other. It's so weird. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the next 20 years or however long God calls us to be together working to live out that job description every single day. So that whether it's a child in the nursery or whether it's someone who has walked with Jesus for 50 or 60 years, we can investigate together what it means for Jesus to be the center of our lives in the same way that those mountains were what gave me direction when I was growing up. Because I believe the only life that truly works is the one where Jesus is being shaped into our lives and our lives are being shaped like Jesus. You see, our movement, the Church of God, based out of Anderson, Indiana, has had this kind of a motto, kind of a call to action over the last few years. Jesus is the subject. And while I don't use that exact phrase a lot, I believe that is the truth. I believe that that is our life's calling. Back when I was a teenager, I can't remember if it was just out of high school, but it was somewhere in that range. You know, growing up in Casper, Wyoming, especially in the 90s, if you wanted anything of substance, you went to Fort Collins or to Denver, right? Because Casper didn't necessarily have a whole lot. And so back then, there was this movie that was coming out, and because of our youth pastor, Joe Ganal, and what he had instilled into us, there was a small group of teenage guys who unashamedly made a trip to Fort Collins to watch the VeggieTales movie. Yes. I told you I was a nerd, and that's only just a part of it. Now my son watches it, and so it's okay, because I can say, oh, he's the one watching it, it's not me, I promise. But the first time that I saw that movie, and I may be wrong, but somewhere around in that range, was the first time I saw this little startup screen that happened right before the movie. Had this little jingle to it that kind of made you smile, and there's this picture of a little kid just kind of stumbling along. And then at the bottom of the screen, it said these words, why we do what we do. And that stuck with me. Because if I think back to that moment where I was in Hong Kong, and maybe just one turn away from my life going in a very different direction, my mother's life going in a very different direction, I'm reminded of why I do what I do. And why I am called to help equip others to do what God has called us to do. Because if my mom had gotten that phone call, Miss Brown, we don't know where your son is, I can't imagine what my mother would have done. But I know that she would have gotten in her car, she would have booked a very expensive, very long flight on a very uncomfortable plane and taken a 12-hour journey out of her way across the world to a country that doesn't speak her language, that she couldn't relate to, that she couldn't even perhaps read some of the signs. At least some of the things in Hong Kong were in English, but not always. And she would have traveled a land that she had no clue where she was, with only the hope, the why she did what she did, that she would see her lost child come home. and my heart as a pastor, as a child of God who was once lost myself, is to see a generation come back to Christ. To see a city come back to Christ in a way that Denver's no longer the fourth least religious city in America. They're the one when people go, when you think of Jesus, I think of that Denver place. I don't know what it is about them, but they are different. They are loving. They have something that I don't know what it is, but I've got to figure out what is going on. And in the same way, the people who are called Slums Lake, that lake is a very beautiful place. And I was just down there yesterday before I came up to meet with you, and there were hundreds of people wandering. And I don't know where their life is. I don't know where their relationship with Jesus is, but if the mathematicians are to be believed, less than 1 in 10 of them have a relationship with Jesus Christ. We have an opportunity. We have a calling to reach a people that God has placed at our front doors, or maybe near your front door, wherever you are in the city. And so I want you to know and understand that if things go in a certain direction today and you call me to be your pastor, that is why I do everything I do. That every aspect of my life and my ministry will be to help people, real people, that God really loves, live a Jesus-centered life. Because I'm convinced that is the best way to live life. Because people are looking, they're searching. This is the most spiritual generation we've ever had, but they're not looking to the church to provide those answers. They're not beating down the doors to come and see what we have. So we have to do things a little bit differently and take the message, as Christ called us to so early on, to them in such a way that they see us and they say, I don't know what is different about those people. And I want to help us to build a church, a building next to one of God's most beautiful scenes in nature that is so passionate about helping people live a Jesus-centered life that when people do step foot in the doors, they go, you know what? I want to be here. I am so encouraged by being here. My children have a place here. My lost brother, he would find hope here. And so because of that, I want to share just a couple final thoughts with you. Usually in a message, I always try to leave with a challenge, something that I hope that you will really do, something simple, something practical. But this morning, you have that thing already in front of you. You have a business meeting where you get to decide whether my family keeps these around or not. I have had this since the 1990s. I didn't just go to the thrift store and try and find it. It's the only item of sports memorabilia that has been in my closet consistently over 20 years. Because you'll need to know I'm not a sports guy. I'm sorry, I may disappoint you. I'm not a sports guy, but I've always had an affinity for them. But I want you to know these few things that as you take into consideration whether or not you feel my calling is to be here as pastor. And the first thing of that is that everything I do will hopefully, I will fail sometimes, but hopefully flow out of this conviction that you see on the screen. That is why I do what I do. Reaching a lost generation, reaching those who are even partially close to Christ, but helping every person live with Jesus at the very center. And because of this, and because there's so much at stake for this lost generation, I will help to equip and disciple each of you here to reach others, to take up the mantle of ministry. It's not just something for a small group of people who have the word pastor in their title, but that each one of us is a pastor. Each one of us is someone who is called to reach people for the lost. And so that means that my primary job description will not be to be the one who does everything for the church, but it will be to equip each of us so that those terrible statistics that people throw out all the time where 20% of the people do 80% of the work is not true in this building and in this people, wherever we are in this community. I also want you to know I will probably disappoint you at some point. Some of you already heard that I'm not a sports fan. I went, oh, never mind. We'll try again. I'm human. I'm still a work in progress as well. I work to center my life on Christ, but there are times when other things sneak into the center without me realizing it. And so there may be moments where I may not love you the way I should. I may not do things that you expect, and you think, what was that all about? Because you know what? I'm still a work in progress as well. But I will never stop loving this people and never stop living with that core value, that core truth. And I will always seek to help take an unchanging gospel to an ever-changing world in a way that's relevant to them. Now, I want you to know that I have no aspirations to come in and bring change for the sake of change. But if I can take a bite out of the elephant in these side of situations, just the fact that I'm a different person than Ed Nelson, just the fact that I have a different gifting than him, I have a different style than him, some things might change. And there might be moments where something that you dearly love changes in a way and you go, I wanted us to be different, but I didn't want that to be different. So if you could just go back to this. But any moments where those happen over the next few weeks, months, years, I want you to know that the core reason behind that, and I'll always try to help us remember the why, is because we are called to reach a lost people. And so that in everything we do, for however long God blesses us with the ability to do it together, we will help every person, wherever they are, in the city, in their walk with Christ, in their broken relationships, in their broken lives, learn what it looks like to put Jesus at the center. And just as this verse in Ephesians tells us, become ever more like him. We will speak truth into a culture that's suddenly aware of truth again. And we will do it in love, in a way that it's not just that fleeting love that seems so hollow and so fake, but so thrown around. Like how I could say I love my wife and I love Taco Bell in the same sentence. And they both give me indigestion in different ways at different times. But it's okay because I give her indigestion in much worse ways. So. But just as this church was planted with a heart to reach lost people in Denver, Colorado, 130 years ago, and a few group of pioneers who went into a very different world, not just because it's different from us now, but because it was different for them. They stepped out of their comfort zones. I believe my calling is to help us, to equip each of us to live out that same calling that started this church 130 years ago. So in the next few minutes, they're going to pass around some ballots. You'll have an opportunity to decide if you feel that this is what God's calling for this church and for this people. And regardless of which direction that goes, I just want you guys to know I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored to have an opportunity to speak to you. And if you'll let me, I would be honored to spend the next however many years God puts us together working towards that very purpose in every moment of every one of our lives. Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, Jesus, you are the subject. That's not just a phrase or a token idea. That is a reality that we live by. And Jesus, I am convinced that when we live our lives with you at the center, that everything else just works better. That just like how I grew up not knowing directions unless the mountains were there, I live in the reality where I don't know how to navigate this life. And I promise I can't do it right unless you're at the center of it. And so I pray that you would help this become the conviction of our heartbeat. God, that you have placed us in a city. Some of us live far away, some of us live right here in this neighborhood, but wherever we are, you have placed us as a people, as your plan A, to reach the world and help them see your love. So Jesus, it's in that conviction that I invite us to continue in worship this morning. And it's in your name I pray. Amen.